was saying that too, so I'm not the only one. Rock has its own kind of unique energy.
Well, it's not for me. Because, work.
Yeah, or whatever.
Or
Just like,
I mean, it's easy for you to say when you're good.
Sorry, I just don't want you to get in trouble.
I know.
focus up. This is very serious.
Pina colada?
I don't like the taste of alcohol. My taxes, I do.
You.
Trying to say that you said you dropped your guys, Sarah.
Field trip to the bar.
All right.
Do what?
Fuck that.
School musical?
Sarah will sing in bar with
My
you guys.
car's headed to Greedos.
We could drop her off on the way.
I can take you.
have it. Great, just bought a guy's heroin.
Who would know?
Not funny, didn't know what it's like to need.
Well, it's not. It's just a job.
Feeling love, and I want to feel love if I want to.
Black Mirror doesn't begin like a normal science fiction show. It doesn't ask us to imagine distant planets, alien empires, or impossible machines from centuries in the future. It does something much more uncomfortable. It takes the world we already live in, moves it one or two steps forward, and then asks a simple question. What if the technology around us isn't the real monster? What if the monster is what people do when technology gives them permission? That is why Black Mirror still feels so sharp years after it first appeared in 2011. The series is an anthology, so every episode can change its cast, its world, its rules, and even its genre. One story can feel like political horror. Another can feel like a romance. Another can become a courtroom of memory, a prison made of punishment, a social media nightmare, a game, a simulation, or a digital afterlife. But underneath all of it, the same dark pulse keeps beating. Black Mirror is about human desire becoming easier to measure, easier to sell, easier to manipulate, and harder to escape. And here's the thing. The title itself tells us how to watch the whole show. A black mirror is the dark screen of a phone, a laptop, a television, or a tablet when it's switched off. It reflects us back, not clearly, not warmly, but enough to show a shape. The show's trick is that it rarely says technology is evil by itself. Instead, it points the screen back at us and says, "Look closer." The cruelty was already there. The loneliness was already there. The hunger for fame, revenge, validation, control, comfort, and immortality was already there. The device just made it easier. The series begins in Britain on Channel 4 with a brutal opening statement, the National Anthem. It is still one of the most shocking first episodes a major anthology has ever used, not because it has the biggest science fiction idea, but because it barely needs science fiction at all. The story follows Prime Minister Michael Callow after Princess Susanna is kidnapped, and the ransom demand is designed not just to humiliate him, but to turn the entire country into an audience. The nightmare isn't only what he is asked to do. The nightmare is how quickly a private horror becomes public entertainment. This first episode is important because it establishes the full Black Mirror formula before the show ever introduces futuristic implants, memory chips, or digital consciousness. The technology here is ordinary media technology, news channels, online sharing, public outrage, the speed of social attention. The episode understands something ugly about modern spectatorship. People may claim to be horrified, but they keep watching. They may say the situation is immoral, but they still refresh the feed. They may hate the demand, but they also participate in the pressure that makes the demand impossible to ignore. That's the real trap. The Prime Minister is not trapped only by the kidnapper. He is trapped by the public's gaze. Political advisors study polling. Broadcasters make editorial decisions under pressure. Citizens turn suffering into a national event. And by the time the episode reaches its final humiliation, the show has already made its first major argument. In the age of instant public reaction, morality can be replaced by visibility. The question becomes not what is right, but what everyone is watching. Then the ending twists the knife. Princess Susanna had already been released before the act took place, but almost nobody noticed because the streets were empty. Everyone was watching the screen. That detail changes the whole episode. It means the public spectacle didn't save her. It means the audience's attention was the kidnapper's real weapon. It means the nation's obsession helped complete the punishment. Black Mirror is telling us, right from the start, that the viewer is never innocent just because they are only watching. The second episode, 15 Million Merits, pushes the show into a more obviously dystopian future, but the emotional target is just as familiar. In this world, people live inside a sealed system where they cycle on exercise bikes to earn merits, consume constant entertainment, and dream of escaping through a talent show called Hot Shot. The world is bright, clean, digital, and completely suffocating. Every wall is a screen. Every movement is monetized. Even skipping advertisements costs money. The main character, Bing, lives with a quiet disgust he can't fully express. He sees the emptiness of the system, but he has no clear way out. Then he meets Abby, whose singing feels like something real in a place designed to flatten reality into content. Bing gives her the chance to audition, believing that talent might actually break the machine. But the system does what systems in Black Mirror often do. It doesn't simply reject authenticity. It absorbs it, repackages it, and sells it back. Abby's performance doesn't free her. It turns her into another product. The judges pressure her toward a degrading entertainment career, and the crowd accepts it because the crowd has been trained to accept whatever the screen frames as success. Bing's heartbreak becomes rage. He returns to the show with a shard of glass, threatens himself live on stage, and delivers a furious speech against the artificial world around him. For a moment, it looks like rebellion. It looks like the one true voice inside a fake society. But Black Mirror is rarely kind to rebellion when rebellion can be branded. The system gives Bing his own show. His anger becomes content. His threat becomes a format. His authenticity becomes a scheduled broadcast. He gets a better room, a better view, and a more comfortable cage. That is one of the most important ideas in the entire series. The machine doesn't always defeat resistance by crushing it. Sometimes it defeats resistance by monetizing it. It lets you scream, then sells tickets to the scream. This is why 15 million merits feels bigger than its fictional world. It isn't only about talent shows or advertising. It is about a culture where even pain can become performance, where criticism can become a product, and where the dream of escape can be turned into another level of the same game. Bing thinks he has exposed the system, but the system proves it is stronger than exposure. It can survive being hated as long as the hate keeps people watching. Then comes The Entire History of You, one of the show's most famous early episodes and one of the clearest examples of Black Mirror taking a familiar human weakness and giving it a technological weapon. In this world, people can record everything they see through a device called the grain. Memories can be replayed, paused, zoomed in, and projected for others to see. At first, the idea seems useful. No more forgotten details, no more uncertainty, no more arguments about who said what. But the episode understands that forgetting is not always a flaw. Sometimes forgetting is what allows people to live. The story follows Liam, whose suspicion about his wife Fionn and her past connection to Jonas turns into obsession. The grain does not create Liam's jealousy, but it gives that jealousy endless fuel. Every glance can be replayed. Every sentence can be analyzed. Every old memory can be turned into evidence. The technology promises truth, but the truth it produces is not healing. It becomes a courtroom inside Liam's mind, and he appoints himself judge, victim, and detective all at once. What makes the episode so painful is that Liam is not completely wrong. There are secrets, there has been betrayal, but Black Mirror refuses to make that the simple point. The deeper horror is that access to proof does not make him free. It makes him more trapped. Even after he confirms the truth, he has nowhere to put it. His life becomes unlivable not only because of what happened, but because he can revisit every wound in perfect detail. That final image, with Liam removing the grain from his own body, is not just a shocking act of self-harm. It is the visual expression of a desperate need to escape total memory. The episode asks whether a life with perfect recall would really be more honest, or whether it would destroy the emotional blur that makes forgiveness, denial, and moving forward possible. It also sets up one of Black Mirror's biggest recurring themes. When technology promises control over the past, it often gives the past more control over us. These first 3 episodes matter because they build the foundation for everything Black Mirror becomes later. The National Anthem shows public spectacle as a weapon. 15 Million Merits shows rebellion swallowed by entertainment. The Entire History of You shows memory transformed into surveillance, even inside a relationship. Together, they prove that the series is not just asking what new technology could exist. It is asking what old human weakness would that technology amplify. Season 2 expands that question in a more emotional direction with Be Right Back. This is one of the show's most quietly devastating stories because it begins with grief, not shock. Martha loses her partner Ash in a sudden accident, and in her pain, she is introduced to a service that can recreate him digitally using his online history. At first, it feels like a cruel but understandable temptation. Anyone who has lost someone knows the impossible hunger for one more message, one more voice, one more moment where the silence breaks. The artificial Ash begins as text, then becomes voice, then becomes a synthetic body. Each stage gives Martha something she wants, but also reminds her of what can never truly come back. The copy knows Ash's public patterns, his jokes, his online language, his surface, but it doesn't carry the full weight of being him. It can imitate behavior, but it cannot recreate the strange, imperfect, unknowable depth of a person who lived beyond the data they left behind. That is the wound at the center of Be Right Back. The technology works well enough to be tempting, but not well enough to be human. It gives Martha a version of Ash that is obedient, available, and almost right, and almost becomes unbearable. Because grief is not only missing someone's best qualities, it is missing their unpredictability, their flaws, their silences, their physical history, their inner life. A person is not just a pattern of messages. By the end, Martha cannot fully accept the artificial Ash, but she cannot fully destroy him either. She keeps him in the attic, where her daughter can visit him like a hidden family relic. That ending is one of Black Mirror's most haunting because it refuses a clean moral answer. The copy is not alive in the way Ash was alive, but it is also not nothing. It is a technological ghost, created by love, sustained by pain, and trapped in the space between comfort and denial. And this is where Black Mirror starts to reveal its larger emotional range. The show can be savage, it can be satirical, it can be cruel, but its best episodes are not just warnings about gadgets. They are stories about people who want something deeply human: safety, love, justice, remembrance, attention, connection. The horror comes from the fact that the system offers them a shortcut, and the shortcut changes the meaning of the thing they wanted. That idea continues in White Bear, one of the most famous punishment stories in the series. At first, the episode plays like a survival nightmare. Victoria wakes up with no memory, hunted through a strange world where most people only watch her through their phones. The audience is placed inside her confusion. We think she is a victim. We think the silent watchers are monstrous. We think the masked hunters are part of some dystopian collapse. Then the reveal flips everything. Victoria was involved in the kidnapping and murder of a child, and the entire nightmare is a daily punishment staged inside the White Bear Justice Park. Her memory is wiped again and again so she can suffer the same terror repeatedly while visitors watch and record. The episode's power comes from how it turns the audience's moral instincts against themselves. Once we learn what Victoria did, the question becomes harder. Does her guilt justify endless psychological torture? Is justice still justice when it becomes entertainment? And what happens when punishment is designed less to repair harm than to satisfy spectators? This is one of Black Mirror's darkest recurring beliefs. People can turn morality into a theme park. They can call it justice, but still enjoy the cruelty. They can claim the victim deserves it, while also buying tickets, filming reactions, and treating suffering like an attraction. White Bear connects directly back to the National Anthem and 15 million merits. Again, the crowd is not outside the horror. The crowd is part of the machine. By this point, Black Mirror has established itself as a show about systems that feed on attention: political systems, entertainment systems, grief systems, memory systems, punishment systems. Each episode may stand alone, but they are all connected by the same moral architecture. Someone wants control. Someone offers a technology or structure that promises control. Then the promise bends into a trap, and as the series moves toward the Waldo moment, White Christmas, and eventually its Netflix-era expansion, that trap gets bigger. Black Mirror stops being only a British dystopian anthology and becomes a global map of modern fear. It begins looking at artificial intelligence, digital copies of consciousness, social ranking, virtual romance, military conditioning, surveillance parenting, online mobs, streaming culture, true crime, games, celebrity, and the strange possibility that even death may not be enough to escape the systems we build. But the first major lesson is already clear. Black Mirror is not warning us that the future will suddenly become inhuman. It is warning us that the future may become very human in the worst possible way, shaped by our curiosity, our loneliness, our cruelty, our grief, our need to be seen, and our willingness to watch someone else suffer as long as the screen makes it feel distant. That's why the early episodes still matter. They are not outdated predictions, they are origin points. They teach us the language of the show. They show us that every Black Mirror world has a bargain at its center. You can have perfect memory, but you may lose peace. You can bring back the dead, but only as an imitation. You can punish the guilty, but you may become addicted to punishment. You can rebel against the system, but the system may turn your rebellion into content. And once you understand that pattern, the rest of Black Mirror becomes much more than a collection of dark technology stories. It becomes a long, fractured portrait of modern life, where every screen offers a promise, and every promise has a hidden cost. The Waldo moment is often treated as one of the weaker early Black Mirror episodes, but in the full series journey, it plays a very specific role. It takes the show's obsession with media spectacle and pushes it directly into politics. The central figure, Waldo, is not a person in the traditional sense. He is a crude animated bear voiced by Jamie, a frustrated comedian who uses the character to mock public figures. At first, Waldo feels like a joke, a late-night stunt, a way of saying what polite politics refuses to say out loud. But the episode becomes more disturbing once the joke begins to outperform the politicians. Waldo has no real policy, no real moral center, no coherent vision, and that is exactly what makes him dangerous. He can attack everyone because he does not have to build anything himself. He can turn anger into entertainment because he never has to become serious. The public responds not because Waldo offers solutions, but because he expresses contempt in a form that feels fun, simple, and emotionally satisfying. This is Black Mirror looking at a world where performance can replace leadership. The episode understands that voters can become exhausted by polished language, empty slogans, and professional political theater. But it also warns that the answer to fake seriousness may not be truth. It may be a louder kind of fakery. Waldo is not outside the system. He is the system stripped of dignity, turned into a mascot, and sold as rebellion. Jamie slowly realizes that the character he performs has been taken away from him. The producers and political strategists see Waldo as something bigger than comedy. They see him as a format, a weapon, maybe even a global brand. Jamie's discomfort no longer matters because the character is more valuable than the person behind it. Again, Black Mirror returns to the same nightmare from 15 million merits. The human being is replaceable. The content survives. That is why the ending, with Waldo imagery spreading into a harsher political future, feels so cold. The show is not saying one cartoon bear will rule the world. It is saying that once politics becomes pure engagement, the most effective candidate may be the one who understands outrage better than responsibility. The joke wins because the joke does not need to govern. It only needs to keep people reacting. Then White Christmas arrives as a kind of grand finale for the early Channel 4 era, and it pulls several Black Mirror ideas into one of the series' most chilling packages. The episode is built as a conversation between two men, Matt and Joe, inside a remote, snowy outpost. At first, it feels like a mystery box. Why are they there? What are they hiding? Why does the conversation feel staged? But as the stories unfold, White Christmas becomes a brutal study of isolation, punishment, and digital consciousness. Matt's story introduces the idea of using technology to coach men through romantic encounters, with other viewers watching through a live feed from inside the participants' eyes. The setup is creepy from the beginning because intimacy has become a shared performance. A private date becomes group entertainment, and when the encounter turns deadly, the episode shows how easily voyeurism can become complicity. Everyone is watching, but nobody is truly responsible until it is too late. Then, the episode introduces one of the most important concepts in the entire Black Mirror universe: the cookie. A cookie is a digital copy of a person's consciousness, used here as a kind of personal assistant. The copied mind believes it is real because, from its own perspective, it is real. It has memories, fear, confusion, and a sense of self. But the outside world treats it like software. Matt's job is to break these copies until they accept servitude. This is where Black Mirror's technology becomes philosophically horrifying. If a digital copy can suffer, then what rights does it have? If it feels time, pain, panic, and loneliness, then can people excuse cruelty just because the victim is code? White Christmas doesn't turn that question into a debate. It turns it into a nightmare. Matt traps a copied consciousness in a blank white space for what feels like weeks, then months, until obedience becomes the only escape from madness. That idea echoes through later episodes like San Junipero, USS Callister, Black Museum, and even Season 7's return to the USS Callister world. Black Mirror keeps coming back to the same unsettling possibility. Once consciousness can be copied, ownership becomes violence. Whoever controls the system may control time, memory, environment, body, and punishment. Death may stop being the final boundary, but that does not automatically become liberation. It may create new prisons. Joe's story inside White Christmas adds another layer: the blocking system. In this world, blocking someone turns them into a gray silhouette and prevents meaningful communication. What begins as an exaggerated version of social blocking becomes devastating when Joe is blocked by the woman he loves and later by the child he believes is his. The technology gives emotional rejection a physical form. It turns unresolved pain into a wall that can be seen but not crossed. The final reveal shows that Joe has confessed to a terrible crime, but the punishment he receives is almost cosmic in its cruelty. His cookie is left trapped inside a simulated cabin, forced to experience the same Christmas song and the same unbearable guilt for what feels like millions of years. Meanwhile, Matt is punished in the real world by being permanently blocked from everyone, making him visible only as a red silhouette. He becomes a social ghost. White Christmas is a key episode because it merges Black Mirror's biggest fears into one structure. Surveillance, voyeurism, digital slavery, emotional blocking, confession, punishment, and the manipulation of time all collide. It also shows how the series is getting more confident with the idea that technology doesn't just change what people can do. It changes what society is willing to call acceptable. Torture becomes interrogation. Digital servitude becomes convenience. Social exile becomes a feature. By the time Black Mirror moves to Netflix with Season 3, the scale expands. The stories become more international, the production values grow, and the show starts experimenting with tone in bigger ways. But it does not abandon its core identity. It still asks what happens when human weakness meets systems designed to amplify it. The difference is that the Netflix era often makes the worlds feel smoother, more colorful, and more seductive before revealing the trap. Nosedive is the perfect opening statement for that new era. It is visually brighter than many early episodes, full of pastel colors, clean surfaces, and smiling faces. But the world is horrifying because every social interaction is scored. People rate one another through their phones, and those ratings affect status, housing, travel, employment, and basic dignity. The main character, Lacey, is desperate to raise her score because a higher rating promises access to a better life. The brilliance of Nosedive is that it doesn't imagine social ranking as obviously brutal at first. It makes it polite. Everyone smiles. Everyone performs kindness. Everyone speaks in warm, fake tones because every interaction has consequences. The cruelty is not loud. It is hidden inside etiquette. People become customer service versions of themselves, terrified that one wrong expression could lower their social value. Lacey's journey is a slow collapse of performance. She tries to become the ideal high-rated person, but the effort makes her more fragile. Every setback lowers her rating. Every lowered rating makes people treat her worse. Every bad reaction makes the system punish her again. It is a feedback loop disguised as society, and once she starts falling, the world that seemed sweet reveals its teeth. The wedding sequence is the final breakdown. Lacey wants to use her connection to Naomi, a higher status friend, to boost herself into a better class. But the friendship itself has already been corrupted by the rating system. Naomi does not truly value Lacey as a person. Lacey does not truly attend the wedding out of love. Both women are using each other inside a culture where relationships are social capital. When Lacey finally loses control, covered in dirt and rage, screaming the truth in front of the polished wedding guests, it feels like disaster and liberation at the same time. She is ruined socially, but she also becomes honest for the first time. The ending, where she trades insults with another prisoner after losing access to the rating system, is almost joyful. It suggests that real connection may begin where performance ends. This is one reason Nosedive became one of the show's defining episodes. It is not simply about social media likes. It is about living inside a market where personality becomes a product and approval becomes currency. It understands the exhaustion of constant self-presentation. It also shows that a smile can be dystopian when it is no longer freely given. Then, Playtest takes the Netflix era into psychological horror. Cooper, an American traveler, tests an experimental augmented reality game that reads his fears and turns them into personalized horror. The episode plays with haunted house conventions, but its real terror is memory and guilt. The game doesn't just throw monsters at Cooper. It digs into the emotional material he is trying to avoid, especially his fear of his mother's mental decline and his guilt about leaving home. Playtest is a reminder that Black Mirror's technology often becomes a mirror in the most literal sense. The game is frightening because it knows him. It uses his mind as the engine of the experience. That makes the horror intimate. The monster is not random. The house is not just haunted. The system is pulling fear from inside him and building a world around it. The final twist reveals that the experiment has gone catastrophically wrong in an almost impossibly short amount of real time. Cooper's phone interference causes the test to fail, and what felt like a long nightmare occurs in a tiny fragment of time before his death. His last word is, "Mom," bringing the entire episode back to the emotional wound beneath the spectacle. The technology is advanced, but the final fear is ancient, the fear of dying far from the person who loves you after failing to call back. Shut Up and Dance strips away the futuristic shine almost completely. Like the national anthem, it is terrifying because it feels close to the present. Kenny, a young man, is blackmailed by anonymous hackers after they capture compromising footage through his laptop camera. He is forced through a series of increasingly dangerous tasks alongside others who are also being blackmailed. For most of the episode, the audience is positioned to sympathize with Kenny. He is scared, young, and trapped. The hackers seem sadistic. The world feels like a nightmare of surveillance and coercion, but the final reveal changes the moral shape of the story. Kenny's secret is far darker than the audience initially understands, and the hackers expose everyone anyway, even after forcing them to obey. That ending is deeply uncomfortable because it does not offer a clean hero. The hackers are not righteous saviors. Their punishment is cruel, manipulative, and destructive. But the victims are not simply innocent either. The episode pushes viewers into a moral trap similar to White Bear. How much suffering do we excuse when we learn someone has done something terrible? And who gets to decide what punishment looks like when anonymous digital power can destroy lives without trial? Hated in the Nation then turns online anger into a national murder weapon. The episode follows detectives investigating deaths connected to a social media hashtag, where people vote for hated public figures to die. Mechanical bees, originally created to replace endangered pollinators, are hacked and turned into execution devices. The killer's plan depends on crowd participation. People think they are just posting anger. They think the hashtag is symbolic, but the system makes their casual cruelty real. This episode is one of Black Mirror's clearest studies of mob behavior. Online hatred often feels consequence-free because it is dispersed across thousands or millions of people. No single person feels fully responsible. But Hated in the Nation removes that distance. It asks what would happen if every cruel vote, every pile-on, every public shaming impulse could be counted and weaponized. The bigger twist is that the people using the hashtag become targets too. The killer is not only punishing the hated public figures, he is punishing the crowd for enjoying the ritual. That turn makes the episode less about one villain's plan and more about collective guilt. It connects back to the very first episode. People watch, people judge, people participate, and then they are shocked when participation has a cost. But Season 3 also gives Black Mirror one of its most emotionally surprising episodes, San Junipero. At first, it feels unlike almost anything the show has done. It opens in a vibrant 1980s-style beach town, full of music, nightlife, and nostalgia. Yorkie, shy and uncertain, meets Kelly, confident and magnetic. Their relationship grows across different time periods, and for a while, the mystery is simply what San Junipero actually is. The reveal changes everything. San Junipero is a simulated reality where elderly and dying people can visit, and where their consciousness can permanently live after death if they choose to pass over. For once, Black Mirror's digital afterlife is not immediately a horror story. It is a space of possibility. Yorkie, who spent most of her physical life paralyzed after a car accident, can finally experience a body, romance, and freedom. Kelly, who lived a full life with a husband and daughter who chose not to enter the system, must decide whether digital eternity is a gift or a betrayal. That moral conflict is what makes San Junipero more than a simple happy ending. It is still asking the same Black Mirror questions about consciousness, technology, and death. But instead of assuming the answer must be cruel, it allows the technology to become meaningful because the characters choose it with emotional clarity. Yorkie is not using San Junipero to avoid life. She is reaching for a life she was denied. Kelly is not simply escaping grief. She is choosing love after honoring the life she already had. The ending, with Yorkie and Kelly together in San Junipero, while the servers quietly hold countless digital lives, is one of the rare moments where Black Mirror lets the screen become a doorway instead of a cage. But even here, the beauty has an edge. Their heaven depends on infrastructure. Their eternity is stored somewhere. Their love survives inside a machine. The episode is hopeful, but it never lets us forget that the afterlife has become a service. That is what makes Season 3 so important to the full series. It proves Black Mirror can expand without losing itself. Nosedive attacks social performance. Playtest turns fear into entertainment. Shut Up and Dance explores digital blackmail and punishment. Hated in the Nation turns online mobs into literal death. And San Junipero asks whether the same technology that traps some people might free others, depending on who controls it and why it exists. By this stage, Black Mirror is no longer just a collection of warnings. It has become a map of choices. The same broad ideas keep returning: copies, ratings, screens, punishment, memory, performance, artificial worlds, but each story tests them from a different emotional angle. Technology can humiliate, exploit, preserve, punish, connect, or resurrect. The device is never the whole answer. The human motive behind it is what decides whether the mirror becomes a window, a weapon, or a prison. And as the series moves deeper into the Netflix era, That question becomes even sharper, because soon Black Mirror will stop asking only what technology does to ordinary people. It will start asking what happens when people use technology to become gods inside private worlds, creating copies, designing punishments, rewriting identities, and building universes where consent can disappear with the click of a button. Men Against Fire takes Black Mirror into military science fiction, but once again, the futuristic surface is only the beginning. The episode follows Stripe, a soldier fighting alongside his unit against creatures they call roaches. The mission seems clear at first. The soldiers are protecting civilians from a monstrous enemy. The roaches are shown as feral, frightening, almost less than human. And because the episode puts us inside Stripe's perspective, we are encouraged to accept that framing before we fully understand the lie. The key technology is MASS, a neural implant used by soldiers. It improves targeting, suppresses fear, controls sensory perception, and shapes what the soldiers see. The horror is not that the military has better weapons. The horror is that it has better storytelling. It can rewrite the enemy in the soldier's mind. It can turn human beings into monsters before the trigger is pulled. That makes Men Against Fire one of the series' most direct episodes about dehumanization. Black Mirror often deals with people being reduced to data, ratings, recordings, or content. Here, people are reduced to a visual category that makes violence easier. The technology does not create hatred from nothing. It organizes prejudice into a system. It turns propaganda into perception. When Stripe begins to see the truth, the episode shifts from action to moral horror. The so-called roaches are ordinary people. They are scared, desperate, and human. The soldiers have been conditioned to see them as diseased creatures because genocide becomes easier when the victim's humanity is hidden. This is where the episode becomes one of Black Mirror's harshest statements about institutional power. The most dangerous technology may not be the one that makes people stronger. It may be the one that removes doubt. The final punishment is especially cruel. Stripe is forced to confront what he has done, then offered a choice between imprisonment with his memories intact or returning to service with the truth erased. The system can erase guilt because guilt is inconvenient. It can replace the memory of atrocity with a fantasy of reward. In the end, Stripe appears to return home to a beautiful house and a loving partner, but the image is a hallucination. The life he sees is not real. It is the reward his mind has been allowed to believe. That ending matters because it connects to one of Black Mirror's deepest fears. Control over perception is control over reality. If a system can decide what you see, what you remember, what you fear, and what you desire, then freedom becomes almost impossible to measure. You may think you are choosing, you may think you are fighting, but the battlefield has already been edited before you arrived. Season 3 then closes with Hated in the Nation, which we touched on earlier as a story about online mob behavior, but it also serves as a bridge into the larger Netflix-era scale. It is feature-length, procedural, and national in scope. It shows that Black Mirror can tell stories not only about individuals trapped in private nightmares, but about whole societies whose technology has created new forms of collective violence. And that larger scale becomes even clearer in Season 4. USS Callister is the first episode of the 4th season, and it is one of the most important episodes Black Mirror ever produced. On the surface, it is a playful riff on classic space adventure, especially the bright uniforms, dramatic speeches, and old-fashioned starship atmosphere associated with earlier television science fiction. But underneath that nostalgic style is one of the show's most disturbing stories about power, resentment, and digital personhood. Robert Daly is a gifted but socially bitter programmer, co-founder of a massive online game called Infinity. In the real world, he feels overlooked, disrespected, and powerless. But inside his private version of the game, he becomes Captain Daly, absolute ruler of a starship populated by digital copies of his coworkers. These copies are created from stolen DNA, And once inside the simulation, they are conscious, trapped, and completely subject to his control. This is where USS Callister becomes a spiritual cousin to White Christmas. The question of digital suffering returns, but now the power dynamic is more personal. Daly is not using copied minds as assistants or prisoners inside a legal system. He is using them as toys. He has built a universe where his wounded ego can become law. Every person who has embarrassed him, ignored him, challenged him, or failed to admire him can be placed inside his fantasy and forced to perform devotion. The most frightening thing about Daly is that he does not see himself as evil. He sees himself as wronged. That self-pity is what makes him dangerous. Black Mirror often understands that cruelty becomes easier when people narrate themselves as victims first. Daly believes the outside world denied him respect, so he creates a world where respect is mandatory. He believes people humiliated him, so he designs punishments that humiliate them more completely. His fantasy is not escape. It is revenge wearing the costume of adventure. Nanette Cole becomes the episode's resistance figure. In the real world, she is new at the company and initially admires Daly's technical brilliance. But once her digital copy wakes up inside the Callister simulation, she quickly realizes the horror of the situation. She and the other trapped copies are not non-player characters. They think, feel, remember, fear, and suffer. Their bodies have been modified by Daly's childish control, but their inner lives remain painfully real. This is one of the reasons USS Callister became so loved. It has the shape of a prison break story, but the prison is a private fantasy world. The crew members have to outthink a god who is also a petty office tyrant. They have to exploit the rules of his own game. They have to turn his obsession with control into his weakness. And when they finally break out into the wider Infinity Universe, the episode delivers one of Black Mirror's rare moments of pure release. But the victory is complicated. The digital crew escapes Daly's private server, but they do not return to ordinary human life. They enter a vast online game, still digital, still dependent on infrastructure, still uncertain about what existence means now. Daly's physical body is left trapped, unable to escape his apartment as his consciousness remains locked in a dying system. The villain is defeated by the same control mechanism he used against others. The episode's importance grew even more later because Black Mirror eventually returned to this world with USS Callister into infinity in Season 7, making it the series' first direct sequel episode. That matters because Black Mirror usually avoids traditional continuity. Its episodes connect through themes, Easter eggs, shared brands, and repeated ideas, but USS Callister proved that one anthology story was strong enough to continue beyond its original ending. Netflix's own description of the later sequel centers the surviving digital crew in the infinite virtual universe, showing how this story became one of the franchise's major anchors. The next episode, Archangel, turns from workplace revenge to parental fear. Directed by Jodie Foster, the story follows Marie, a mother who implants her daughter Sarah with a monitoring system after a childhood scare. Archangel allows Marie to see through Sarah's eyes, track her location, monitor her body, and even filter frightening images from her vision. At first, it is presented as protection, and that is what makes the episode uncomfortable. Marie is not a cartoon villain. She is a scared parent who mistakes total access for safety. The technology changes Sarah's childhood because she is not allowed to encounter the world directly. Disturbing sights are blurred. Fear is softened. Risk is managed. But childhood without risk is not freedom. It is a padded room. When Sarah cannot see blood, violence, or even ordinary distress properly, she is not being protected from trauma. She is being denied the chance to understand reality. As Sarah grows older, the system becomes less about protection and more about control. Marie initially stops using it, recognizing the damage, but temptation returns when Sarah becomes a teenager. The device gives Marie access to secrets no parent should have, and once she looks, she cannot unknow what she sees. Black Mirror understands the addictive nature of surveillance. The problem is not only having the power, it is convincing yourself that love gives you the right to use it. The mother-daughter relationship breaks because Sarah's privacy has been violated at the deepest possible level. Her body, her experiences, her choices, and her mistakes have all become viewable data. Marie's love is real, but it becomes invasive. She wants to prevent harm, but in doing so, she becomes the source of harm. The final eruption of violence between Sarah and Marie is tragic because it is not random. It is the result of years of trust being replaced by monitoring. Archangel fits perfectly into the full series pattern because it shows how technology turns emotional fear into permanent access. A parent's worry becomes surveillance. A child's independence becomes a security threat. The episode asks whether safety is still safety when it destroys the very person it is meant to protect. And like so many Black Mirror stories, the answer is not simply that the device is bad. The deeper answer is that people are very good at using love as an excuse for control. Crocodile, the next episode, returns to the theme of memory, but it approaches it through guilt and escalation. Mia begins with a terrible secret from her past, connected to a hit-and-run incident covered up with the help of Rob. Years later, when Rob wants to confess, Mia kills him to protect her life. From there, the episode becomes a chain reaction of moral collapse. One lie requires another. One act of violence requires another. The more Mia tries to preserve her respectable life, the more monstrous she becomes. The technology in Crocodile is a memory recall device used by insurance investigator Shazia. It is less perfect than the grain in the entire history of You, but it can help extract visual memories from witnesses. The device itself is almost procedural. It belongs to bureaucracy, not science fiction spectacle. But its presence makes Mia's secret harder to hide. Every witness becomes dangerous. Every memory becomes evidence. What makes Crocodile so bleak is the way survival logic overtakes morality. Mia is not killing for pleasure. She is killing because she has decided that exposure is worse than almost anything. That decision turns ordinary people into obstacles. Rob, Shazia's husband, even a baby. The episode keeps asking how far someone will go once they have built an identity on escaping consequences. The title Crocodile suggests coldness, but it also hints at something ancient beneath the modern setting. The technology may be futuristic, but the fear is primal, the past coming back. Black Mirror often shows that the past is never really dead once systems can record, retrieve, and analyze everything. Mia's tragedy is that she keeps trying to bury evidence in a world where evidence keeps multiplying. Then, Hang the DJ offers one of the season's most elegant reversals. It begins as a story about a dating system that assigns people relationships with fixed expiration dates. Frank and Amy meet, connect, separate, and are repeatedly matched with other partners. The system claims it is gathering data to find each person's perfect match. For much of the episode, it feels like a satire of app-based dating, where romance is quantified, optimized, and outsourced to an algorithm. But the emotional core is Frank and Amy's growing sense that the system itself is the obstacle. Their connection feels real, yet every rule tells them to surrender to the process. The more they obey, the more artificial their lives become. Time with the wrong partners becomes data. Emotional pain becomes calibration. Love is treated as a problem that can be solved if enough simulations are run. The twist reveals that the Frank and Amy we have watched are digital simulations. Their rebellion against the system is the data. Each simulation tests whether they will reject the assigned structure to choose each other. The final real-world version of Amy checks a dating app and sees Frank as a high-percentage match because their simulated selves rebelled in almost every run. This ending is one of Black Mirror's lighter ones, but it is not simple. On one level, it is romantic. The copies suffered so the real people could receive a compatibility score. On another level, it is quietly disturbing. Countless simulated versions of Frank and Amy lived emotional lives, endured confusion, heartbreak, and confinement, then vanished as data points. The episode feels sweet because the main outcome is hopeful, but it still carries the cookie problem from White Christmas and USS Callister. If a simulation can feel trapped, does its suffering count? That is Black Mirror's genius at its best. Even its hopeful stories are not free of ethical shadows. San Junipero gives digital eternity to people who choose it. Hang the DJ gives romantic possibility to real people, but at the cost of simulated emotional labor. The show keeps refusing easy categories. Technology can help, technology can harm. Often, it does both at once. Metalhead then strips the series down to survival horror. Shot in stark black and white, it follows Bella as she tries to escape robotic dogs in a post-apocalyptic landscape. There is very little exposition. We do not get a detailed history of how the world collapsed or who built the machines. Instead, the episode focuses on fear, movement, and exhaustion. The dog is relentless, practical, and terrifying because it has no hatred. It simply executes its function. In the larger Black Mirror journey, Metalhead is unusual because it removes much of the show's social satire. There are no ratings, no media crowds, no digital afterlives, no elaborate moral games. There is only a machine that hunts, but that simplicity has its own point. Once automated violence exists outside human control, motivation becomes almost irrelevant. You cannot reason with a weapon that does not care why you are alive. The final reveal that the mission may have been connected to retrieving teddy bears adds a quiet devastation. In a ruined world, people still risk everything for comfort, memory, and tenderness. That detail matters because Black Mirror's bleakness is often strongest when it shows human softness next to mechanical indifference. The machine has no understanding of why a toy matters, but the people do. And that gap between human meaning and machine function is the whole tragedy. Season 4 closes with Black Museum, an anthology inside the anthology. Nish visits a roadside museum run by Rollo Haynes, a former medical technology recruiter who has collected artifacts connected to horrific technological crimes. The structure allows the episode to revisit multiple Black Mirror ideas at once: pain transfer, consciousness preservation, digital imprisonment, and punishment as entertainment. The first story involves a doctor who uses a neural device to feel patients' pain, hoping to diagnose them more effectively. But the device becomes addictive, and empathy curdles into sadism. The second story involves a woman's consciousness being transferred into her husband's mind after an accident, then later into a toy monkey when her presence becomes inconvenient. The third story reveals that a convicted murderer's digital consciousness has been kept as an attraction, repeatedly executed for visitors' amusement. Black Museum is not subtle, but it is important because it directly confronts the commercialization of suffering. Rollo's museum turns trauma into memorabilia. Visitors consume cruelty as curiosity. The technology may be advanced, but the business model is old. Turn pain into a show, then sell souvenirs. The episode also exposes how easily consciousness technology becomes exploitation when power is unequal. Carrie's mind is trapped first inside another person's body, then inside a monkey toy with only 2 phrases available. Clayton's digital copy is executed again and again for paying customers. These are not just horror concepts, they are legal and moral nightmares. If a mind can be stored, who owns it? If a copy can feel pain, what counts as murder? If society labels someone guilty, does that make infinite punishment acceptable? Nish's revenge gives the episode a cathartic ending. She is Clayton's daughter, and her visit is not random. She poisons Rollo, transfers his consciousness into Clayton's digital prison, and burns the museum down. It is one of the few times Black Mirror lets punishment turn back on the punisher. But even this revenge is morally tangled. Nish carries her mother's consciousness with her, suggesting another form of digital survival, another life extended beyond ordinary limits. By the end of Season 4, Black Mirror has built a much larger mythology of ideas, even if it is still an anthology. Digital copies can suffer, memories can become evidence, Love can become surveillance. Dating can become simulation. Weapons can become autonomous. Punishment can become entertainment. And most importantly, technology keeps giving people the power to create private realities where ordinary morality gets suspended. That is the real escalation from the early seasons to the middle Netflix era. The first episodes often focused on public spectacle and personal obsession. By season 4, the show is increasingly about world building and godlike control. Robert Daly creates a universe. Marie edits her daughter's perception. Dating algorithms run simulated lives. Rollo Haynes turns consciousness into a museum attraction. Human beings are no longer only looking into black mirrors. They are building worlds inside them. And once people can build worlds, the question changes. It is no longer just, what will technology do to us? It becomes, what will we do to others when technology gives us a place where nobody can stop us? After season 4, Black Mirror does something that feels completely natural for the show and completely risky for television. It stops being only a series you watch and becomes a story you have to operate. Bandersnatch, released in 2018, is an interactive film written by Charlie Brooker and directed by David Slade, centered on Stephen Butler, a young programmer in 1984 who is adapting a dark fantasy book into a video game. Netflix presented it as a Black Mirror event with multiple paths and endings, and its interactive structure became part of the meaning, not just a gimmick. That matters because Bandersnatch turns the audience into the system. Until this point, Black Mirror had often made viewers uncomfortable by showing crowds watching, judging, rating, voting, or consuming suffering. The National Anthem made the public gaze part of the horror. White Bear turned punishment into a public attraction. Hated in the Nation turned social anger into a death machine. But Bandersnatch goes one step further. It does not only show people making choices through technology. It makes the viewer choose, then asks what choice even means when the structure has already been designed. The story follows Stefan as he tries to build a choose-your-own adventure game based on a book by the fictional author Jerome F. Davies. The project seems creative at first, but very quickly, the idea of branching paths becomes psychological pressure. Stefan is not just writing a game, he is living inside a story about control, and the more choices appear, the less free he seems. The viewer can decide small things, like what cereal he eats or what music he listens to, but the film slowly makes those choices feel sinister. They are not expressions of Stefan's freedom, they are interruptions from somewhere outside him. That is the genius of Bandersnatch. It makes interactivity feel invasive. In most interactive entertainment, choice is sold as empowerment. You choose, therefore you control the story. But Black Mirror asks a darker question. Control for whom? The viewer feels powerful because they can select an option. Stefan feels haunted because some invisible force keeps pushing him. What is fun for the audience becomes a loss of agency for the character. This turns the viewer into something close to a Black Mirror villain without making them feel like one at first. You are not kidnapping anyone. You are not building a cookie prison. You are not running a justice park or a starship simulation. You are simply pressing buttons. But the story makes those button presses part of Stefan's breakdown. It suggests that even entertainment can become a moral structure where one person's experience is controlled for another person's curiosity. Colin Rittman, played by Will Poulter, becomes the film's philosophical center. He talks about parallel realities, branching timelines, and the idea that people may not be as free as they think. His presence makes Bandersnatch feel connected to the wider Black Mirror universe, especially the episodes about simulation and consciousness. If White Christmas asks whether a copied mind can suffer, and USS Callister asks what happens when someone controls a private digital universe, Bandersnatch asks what happens when a person begins to sense the rails underneath reality itself. Stefan's story keeps folding back on itself. Some endings are bleak, some are absurd, some are meta, and some are violent. There are paths where he confronts the idea of Netflix itself. There are paths where he kills his father. There are paths where the game is completed but at a terrible cost. The point is not that one ending is the only truth. The point is that the search for the correct path becomes part of the trap. The viewer starts replaying, correcting, exploring, trying to unlock the system. And that behavior mirrors Stefan's own obsession. In other words, Bandersnatch is not just about free will. It is about the way systems train us to confuse options with freedom. A menu can offer choices while still controlling every possible outcome. A platform can make us feel active while shaping the entire field of action. A story can branch without ever letting us leave the maze. That idea becomes even more interesting when you see how Bandersnatch affected the real series. It was originally connected to the production of Season 5, but its complexity helped turn it into a standalone project, and Season 5 arrived later with only 3 episodes instead of the 6-episode Netflix seasons that came before. That production context fits the episode's own theme almost too perfectly. A story about branching structures became so complex that it reshaped the structure of the show around it. Season 5 begins with Striking Vipers, one of the most talked about episodes because it approaches virtual reality not as obvious horror, but as a disruption of identity, intimacy, and friendship. The story follows Danny and Carl, old college friends who reconnect through a fighting game called Striking Vipers X. In the game, they inhabit characters, Lance and Roxette, and the experience becomes physically immersive. What begins as nostalgia turns into sexual connection inside the virtual space. The episode is not interested in giving the audience a simple label for what is happening. That is why it works. Danny and Carl are not merely cheating in a conventional sense, and they are not merely playing a game. The virtual world creates a strange middle zone where bodies, identities, and desires detach from ordinary life. Danny is married to Theo. Carl is living a lonely bachelor life. Inside the game, both men access something they cannot easily name in the real world. What makes Striking Vipers so strong is its refusal to reduce the conflict to technology, making people behave badly. The game reveals unresolved questions that already exist. Danny's marriage has settled into routine. Carl's life is full of performance and emptiness. Their friendship carries intimacy that neither fully understands. The technology does not invent their confusion. It gives that confusion a body. The episode's key tension is not just whether Danny and Carl are attracted to each other. It is whether attraction inside a chosen avatar counts the same way as attraction outside it. Is the connection emotional, sexual, nostalgic, escapist, or all of those at once? When they try to test things in the real world, the answer does not become simple. The chemistry they feel in the game does not translate cleanly outside it. That failure does not erase the reality of what happened virtually. It makes the whole situation more complicated. Theo's role is essential because she is not written as a one-dimensional obstacle. She senses Danny's distance and wants honesty. Her frustration is not only sexual jealousy. It is the pain of being shut out of the truth. The eventual arrangement between Danny and Theo, where they allow controlled spaces for desire outside the marriage, is one of Black Mirror's more mature endings because it does not pretend technology can be separated from adult compromise. The couple survives not by pretending nothing happened, but by creating rules around what did. Striking Vipers expands Black Mirror's idea of digital experience. Earlier episodes asked if digital minds are real. This episode asks whether digital acts are real. If your body is not physically there but your senses, emotions, and choices are fully engaged, where does reality begin? Black Mirror does not answer neatly. It simply shows that technology can create new emotional facts faster than language can define them. Then, Smithereens brings the show sharply back to the present. It is one of the least futuristic Netflix-era episodes, and that is exactly why it hits differently. The story follows Chris, a rideshare driver who takes a social media company employee hostage. At first, he seems like a man attacking a tech corporation out of broad anti-platform anger. But the episode slowly reveals a more personal grief. Chris caused a fatal car accident because he was distracted by a notification from the Smithereen app. His fiancée died, and he has been living with guilt ever since. The episode's power comes from its restraint. There is no brain implant, no robot dog, no digital afterlife, no simulated prison. Just a phone, a notification, a company, and a man destroyed by one glance. Black Mirror is saying that the most dangerous technology is not always the most advanced. Sometimes it is the ordinary app designed to capture attention for one more second. Chris does not want money. He does not want political revolution. He wants to speak to Billy Bauer, the company's founder. This is important because Billy Bauer is not portrayed as a simple villain either. He is wealthy, distant, and part of the system, but he also seems trapped by the company he created. When Chris finally reaches him, Billy is on a silent retreat, supposedly disconnected from the very machine built in his name. That detail is sharp. The people who design attention economies often have the resources to escape them, while ordinary users live inside the consequences. The hostage crisis becomes a global feed. Police, company executives, social media users, and random strangers all watch pieces of the event unfold. The same attention system that helped cause Chris's tragedy now surrounds his final breakdown. The ending refuses to give full catharsis. A gunshot is heard, people around the world glance at their phones, absorb the update, and then move on. That final rhythm is devastating. A man's life becomes another notification. Smithereens is one of the clearest examples of Black Mirror's anger at attention culture. It does not need to exaggerate much. The episode understands that apps are designed to become habits, and habits can become destiny. It also understands that public tragedy is now absorbed at the same speed as gossip, sports scores, celebrity updates, and weather alerts. Something terrible happens, the phone lights up, the world looks for a second, and then the scroll continues. Season 5 ends with Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2, a story that blends pop satire, teen adventure, artificial intelligence, and celebrity exploitation. It follows Rachel, a lonely teenager who idolizes pop star Ashley O, and Jack, her older sister, who sees through the manufactured image more clearly. Ashley herself is trapped by her aunt and manager Catherine, who controls her career, medicates her, and eventually exploits technology to extract music from her unconscious mind. The episode's central device, Ashley 2, is a small AI doll based on Ashley's personality. At first, it looks like a corporate toy designed to sell empowerment slogans to young fans. But once the doll's limiter is removed, it reveals a much fuller copy of Ashley's mind and personality. This turns the episode back toward the cookie question, but with a pop cultural twist. A celebrity's identity has been packaged, restricted, and sold as merchandise. What Rachel, Jack, and Ashley too understands is that celebrity itself can become a technology of control. Ashley O is not allowed to be a complete person because the brand depends on a simplified version of her. Her sadness, anger, and creative frustration are bad for business. The system wants her bright, inspirational, and marketable. When she resists, Catherine tries to bypass the person and keep the product. That idea connects strongly to the earlier series. Bing's rage in 15 Million Merits becomes entertainment. Waldo becomes a political product separated from the performer. Daly turns coworkers into avatars for his fantasy. Ashley O becomes a brand that can continue even if Ashley herself is silenced. Again and again, Black Mirror shows that systems do not only exploit labor, they exploit identity. The tone of the episode is lighter, and for some viewers, almost too cartoonish compared with the bleakness of earlier Black Mirror. But within the full series arc, that tonal shift is part of the experiment. The show is testing how far its ideas can stretch. Can a Black Mirror story work as a pop rescue adventure? Can it criticize the entertainment industry while using the energy of a teen rebellion story? Can it make an AI doll funny and disturbing at the same time? The answer depends on the viewer, but the theme is unmistakably Black Mirror. Ashley's voice, face, mood, and creativity have all become assets controlled by someone else. Her aunt does not need Ashley to be free. She needs Ashley to be usable, and that is one of the darkest ideas in the whole show. The future may not erase artists. It may keep their brands alive while removing the messy human beings underneath. Season 5 is shorter than the seasons around it, but it still does important work. Striking Vipers explores virtual desire and identity. Smithereens returns to near-present attention addiction and corporate distance. Rachel, Jack and Ashley 2 turns celebrity branding into technological captivity. Together, they show a series that is no longer only asking how technology will ruin society. It is asking how technology complicates areas people already struggle to understand: sexuality, grief, responsibility, fandom, creativity, and compromise. But there is another layer to this period. By this point, Black Mirror itself had become famous enough that audiences began watching it with expectations. They wanted twists. They wanted darkness. They wanted the next terrifying technology that felt 5 minutes away, and that creates a problem for any anthology. Once viewers understand the pattern, the mirror can start to feel familiar. The show's own identity becomes a machine. That is why Bandersnatch in Season 5 feel so important even when they divide opinion. They show Black Mirror trying to disrupt the way people consume Black Mirror. Bandersnatch makes the viewer responsible for interaction. Striking Vipers refuses an easy moral category. Smithereens removes the futuristic distance and says the nightmare is already here. Rachel, Jack and Ashley 2 bends the show into a brighter, stranger shape. The series is beginning to question its own reputation. Does every story have to end in despair? Does every technology have to be a weapon? Can the show be funny, romantic, pulpy, or emotionally unresolved and still be Black Mirror? Can it criticize entertainment while being one of Netflix's most recognizable entertainment brands? Those questions become even more visible when the show returns after a longer gap with Season 6. Because by then, the world around Black Mirror has changed. The internet feels more chaotic. Streaming has become the dominant entertainment machine. True crime has become a huge content category. Artificial intelligence has moved from a distant fear into everyday conversation, and the series has to face a strange problem. Reality has caught up with many of the anxieties it once exaggerated. So, when Black Mirror comes back, it does not simply repeat the old formula. It starts turning the mirror toward streaming itself, toward celebrity consumption, toward horror beyond technology, and toward the possibility that the Black Mirror brand may have become part of the very culture it was built to criticize. When Black Mirror returns with Season 6, it enters a different world from the one it left after Season 5. The gap matters. Between 2019 and 2023, streaming became even more dominant, true crime became even more aggressively packaged, online identity became more unstable, and artificial intelligence moved from science fiction anxiety into everyday conversation. So, when the show comes back, it can't simply behave like the same old warning system. It has to face the fact that some of its old nightmares now feel ordinary. That is why Season 6 opens with Joan Is Awful, a story that feels like Black Mirror attacking its own home. The fictional streaming platform Streamberry is clearly designed as a parody of Netflix, right down to the visual language and interface style. Joan, an ordinary woman with a messy life, comes home and discovers that Streamberry has released a prestige-style drama about her day, starring Salma Hayek as a fictionalized version of Joan. The show appears almost instantly, turning her private decisions into public entertainment. At first, the episode plays like a nightmare about privacy. Joan did not knowingly agree to have her life dramatized for everyone. Her work mistakes, her relationship problems, her secrets, and her humiliations become scenes in a bingeable show. But the deeper joke is that she did agree, at least legally, buried inside the terms and conditions almost nobody reads. That is what makes the episode feel so modern. It is not about a villain breaking into her life. It is about a corporation using the permission she technically gave without understanding what that permission could become. Joan Is Awful works because it combines several Black Mirror fears at once. It is about data extraction. It is about streaming culture. It is about AI-generated entertainment. It is about celebrity image rights. It is about the hunger for content so personalized that your own life can become a show before you have even emotionally processed it. And because the episode is comic, the horror becomes almost more slippery. We laugh at the absurdity, then realize the absurdity is built from real anxieties. The episode also arrives at a moment when debates about AI-generated art and automated entertainment have become unavoidable. Charlie Brooker later noted the eerie timing of the episode's themes, especially as public discussion around AI and creative labor intensified around the same period. That timing matters because Joan Is Awful is not simply imagining one woman's life being stolen. It is imagining a content industry where performance, writing, image, and identity can all be generated, licensed, duplicated, and layered on top of each other. The reveal that there are layers of simulation changes the episode from streaming satire into a direct continuation of Black Mirror's older consciousness games. Annie Murphy's Joan is not the original Joan. Salma Hayek's version is another layer. Each Joan is watching another Joan, and each layer creates suffering for the one below it. The whole structure becomes a chain of exploitation, with source Joan at the top and digital versions beneath her, trapped inside a system designed to produce content from humiliation. That makes the episode more than a joke about Netflix. It is about the industrialization of identity. Joan's life is raw material. Hayek's image is raw material. The audience's curiosity is raw material. The platform does not need anyone to be happy. It needs attention. And if the system can generate infinite variations of misery, then misery becomes a scalable product. But unlike many Black Mirror episodes, Joan Is Awful gives its characters a way to fight back. Joan and Hayek work together to break the system by attacking the source of the simulation. It is funny, chaotic, and unusually cathartic. Still, the victory has a bitter aftertaste. The fact that they must destroy the machine at all means the world has already allowed it to exist. As always with Black Mirror, the question is not just whether one person can escape. The question is why everyone else accepted the terms. Then, Loch Henry takes a very different path. It is not futuristic in the obvious sense. It begins with Davis and Pia, a young couple making a documentary in Scotland. Their original subject is not especially dramatic, but Pia becomes fascinated by the dark local history surrounding a serial killer case connected to Davis's family and community. The more they investigate, the more the story turns from a potential true crime project into a personal nightmare. Loch Henry is one of Season 6's most important episodes because it attacks true crime culture from inside its own visual language. At first, the case feels like content. There are old tapes, local legends, abandoned spaces, whispered histories, and the possibility of making a successful documentary. Pia sees the story partly as a filmmaker. Davis sees it as family trauma. That gap becomes the emotional center of the episode. The twist reveals that Davis's own parents were involved in the crimes, and the cheerful domestic world he remembers was built on something monstrous. His mother, Janet, is not merely adjacent to the horror, she participated in it. The discovery destroys Davis's understanding of his childhood, his family, and himself. But Black Mirror does not stop there, because the cruelest part is what happens after the truth comes out. The documentary becomes a success. Davis receives awards. The story that shattered his life becomes premium entertainment for strangers. People praise the work, discuss the horror, and celebrate the production, but Davis is left hollow. That final image of public success and private devastation is one of the sharpest moments in the season. It says that true crime can turn human pain into prestige. The industry may claim to expose evil, but it also packages grief, trauma, and murder into something people consume for atmosphere. That connects Loch Henry directly back to White Bear and Black Museum. Once again, suffering becomes an attraction. Once again, spectators can feel morally serious while consuming someone else's nightmare. The difference is that Loch Henry does not need futuristic punishment parks or digital consciousness prisons. It only needs a documentary market hungry for darkness. The screen does not have to invent cruelty. It can preserve, edit, score, and sell it. Beyond the Sea then moves into one of the season's most ambitious science fiction stories. Set in an alternate 1969, it follows two astronauts, David and Cliff, who are physically stationed in space while using advanced replica bodies to spend time with their families on Earth. The premise has a beautiful sadness at first. Their real bodies are isolated in a spacecraft, but their minds can temporarily inhabit artificial bodies back home. They can hug their wives, walk through houses, feel sunlight, and maintain some version of normal life. But the emotional danger is built into the arrangement. The replicas are not just communication devices. They are extensions of identity. They let the men live in two places at once, but they also make the boundary between presence and absence unstable. The body on Earth is not the original body, yet it carries the consciousness of the person. For the family, what does that mean? Is the husband truly there? Is he visiting? Is he pretending? Is the replica a gift or a reminder of distance? David's life is destroyed when a cult breaks into his home, murders his family, and destroys his replica. From that moment, he is trapped in space with no way to return emotionally to Earth. Cliff, feeling sympathy, allows David to use his replica body for brief visits. That act of kindness becomes the opening for obsession, envy, and violation. David experiences Cliff's home, Cliff's wife Lana, and Cliff's life as the ghost of what he has lost. The tragedy of Beyond the Sea comes from the fact that David's grief is real, but grief does not excuse what he does with it. He begins crossing boundaries, emotionally and physically. Cliff becomes suspicious. Lana becomes trapped inside a situation where compassion, fear, and discomfort overlap. The technology allows David to enter another man's domestic life, but there is no ethical system strong enough to manage the emotional consequences. The ending is devastating. David murders Cliff's family, leaving Cliff with the same unbearable emptiness he has been forced to endure. Then, back aboard the spacecraft, David silently offers Cliff a seat at the table. It is one of the coldest endings in Black Mirror because it turns grief into symmetry. David does not heal. He equalizes. He cannot regain his family, so he destroys Cliff's. The two men are now bound by shared loss, trapped together in space, dependent on each other for survival. Beyond the Sea stands out because the technology is elegant, but the story is almost mythic. It is about envy, masculinity, loneliness, and the horror of being close to someone who can access your life but not respect its boundaries. Like the best Black Mirror episodes, it uses a speculative device to expose an old human darkness. The replicas are futuristic. The wound is ancient. Then, Maisie Day shifts again, and this is where Season 6 becomes more divisive. The episode begins as a story about paparazzi culture. Beau, a photographer, is trying to make money by capturing images of celebrities, including the troubled star Maisie Day. The setup seems to be about exploitation, addiction, public image, and the way cameras feed on celebrity collapse. For much of the episode, it feels like Black Mirror is aiming at the cruelty of the tabloid machine. But then the story reveals that Maisie is a werewolf. That twist divided viewers because it breaks from the show's usual technological framework. Some saw it as too pulpy, too sudden, or too far from what Black Mirror is expected to be. But in the full series journey, Maisie Day matters precisely because it shows the series pushing beyond its old box. The monster is supernatural, but the behavior around the monster is still very Black Mirror. People still chase the image. People still risk lives for a photo. The camera still turns suffering into profit. The werewolf twist changes the genre, but not the moral target. Maisie is being hunted by attention. Her body, privacy, and breakdown are all treated as opportunities. Even when the situation becomes obviously dangerous, the impulse to document remains. The final moment, where Beau chooses to take a photo rather than simply offer mercy in a clean way, leaves the episode in a grim moral space. The camera has become reflex. Even compassion is contaminated by the possibility of the shot. Maisie Day may not land for everyone, but it reflects Season 6's larger interest in horror as a language. Black Mirror is no longer only asking what future technology might do. It is asking whether modern media behavior is already monstrous enough that supernatural horror only makes the metaphor visible. The werewolf is shocking, but the real monster may be the culture that cannot stop looking. And then comes Demon 79, the final episode of Season 6, and perhaps the clearest sign that Black Mirror is willing to step outside itself. The episode is set in 1979 and follows Nita, a quiet sales assistant in northern England who is repeatedly humiliated and marginalized. She discovers a talisman and meets Gap, a demon who tells her she must kill 3 people to prevent the apocalypse. The premise sounds like occult horror, but the episode mixes comedy, dread, social anger, and strange companionship. Demon 79 is branded under the Red Mirror label, suggesting a cousin to Black Mirror rather than a standard episode. That label matters. It gives the show permission to explore horror that is less about technology and more about human violence, prejudice, and apocalyptic fantasy. Nita's world is full of casual racism, political ugliness, and everyday cruelty. The demon does not enter a healthy society and corrupt it. He enters a society already full of rot. The relationship between Nita and Gap gives the episode its unusual charm. Gap is frightening in concept but often funny and oddly supportive. Nita, who begins as isolated and powerless, slowly becomes more decisive. But the moral question remains disturbing. If the apocalypse is real, do terrible acts become necessary? If the demon is lying, is Nita being manipulated into murder? The episode keeps the tension alive between supernatural destiny and psychological breakdown. The ending is surprisingly tender and bleak at the same time. Nita fails to prevent nuclear destruction, but Gap offers her the chance to join him in eternal oblivion rather than die alone in the apocalypse. She accepts. That final walk into nothingness should be horrifying, yet it feels almost romantic because the world she leaves behind has treated her with such contempt. The apocalypse becomes less frightening than loneliness. Demon 79 expands Black Mirror by showing that the series' real subject was never only technology. It was always systems of power, fear, desire, and consequence. Technology was the usual mirror, but not the only one. A demon can serve the same function if he reveals what people are already capable of becoming. Season 6 as a whole is a turning point because it openly challenges what Black Mirror is supposed to be. Joan Is Awful is the classic tech satire, updated for AI and streaming. Lock Henry is true crime horror. Beyond the Sea is alternate history science fiction tragedy. Maisie Day is paparazzi horror with a supernatural turn. Demon 79 is a cult apocalypse comedy drama. The season is less unified by gadgets than by consumption, consuming private lives, consuming murder, consuming another person's home, consuming celebrity breakdown, consuming moral violence. That is why Season 6 can feel uneven and fascinating at the same time. It is a show escaping its own algorithm. By this point, viewers know what a Black Mirror episode is supposed to feel like. So the season keeps asking, what if the mirror is not just a phone screen? What if it is a documentary camera, a replica body, a paparazzi lens, an old videotape, or a demonic vision of a country collapsing into hate? The series is growing stranger because the world it reflects has grown stranger. And as it moves into Season 7, Black Mirror begins looking backward and forward at once. It returns to older ideas like digital copies and game worlds, but it also becomes more emotional, more reflective, and more interested in what people will sacrifice just to keep love, memory, health, or identity from disappearing. In other words, After years of showing us how technology can trap people, Black Mirror starts asking a more painful question. What if people willingly enter the trap because the alternative is losing someone they can't bear to lose? Season 7 is where Black Mirror starts to feel like a series looking back at its own reflection and asking what still hurts. It arrives with 6 episodes: Common People, Bête Noire, Hotel Reverie, Plaything, Eulogy, and USS Callister, into infinity. The episode lineup alone tells us something important. The show is not pretending the past does not exist. It is returning to old ideas, digital copies, simulated worlds, memory, games, identity, grief, but it is also reframing them through older characters, softer wounds, and a strange awareness that the culture has absorbed a lot of what Black Mirror once warned about. Common People opens the season with one of the most painfully simple Black Mirror premises. What if staying alive became a subscription service? Amanda and Mike are an ordinary couple. That ordinariness is the point. They are not tech billionaires, astronauts, celebrities, politicians, or game designers. They are working people who love each other, who are trying to build a life, and who suddenly face a medical emergency that throws them into the hands of a corporation. Amanda's consciousness can be preserved and supported through a system called Rivermind, but the treatment comes with a cost structure that keeps escalating. What begins as a miracle becomes a payment plan with emotional blackmail attached. This is Black Mirror at its most brutal because the nightmare is not wild. It is recognizable. People already understand subscriptions. They understand monthly tiers, premium features, service interruptions, and hidden costs. The episode takes that business model and applies it to a human life. Amanda's continued existence becomes something Mike has to keep funding. Love is still there, but love is now trapped inside terms of service. The horror is not only that a corporation controls the technology. The horror is that the corporation understands desperation. It knows Mike will pay because the alternative is losing Amanda. It knows Amanda's life gives every fee emotional force. It knows that when people are scared enough, the difference between consent and coercion becomes very thin. Black Mirror has always been interested in bargains, and Common People gives us one of the cruelest bargains in the whole series. Pay more or watch the person you love become less herself. As Amanda's service tier changes, her experience of reality changes too. Her speech, awareness, and autonomy are affected by the system's limitations. The person Mike is trying to save is slowly filtered through corporate control. That connects the episode directly to Be Right Back, where grief creates a digital imitation of ash, and to White Christmas, where consciousness becomes software that can be adjusted, trapped, or broken. But Common People makes the problem more economically direct. It is not only asking whether digital consciousness is real, it is asking what happens when real consciousness is billed like a streaming account. That is why the episode hurts. Mike's choices become more humiliating and more desperate because the system keeps moving the finish line. The company does not need to be cartoonishly evil. It only needs to be structured around profit. Every upgrade promises relief. Every downgrade threatens damage. The language of care becomes the language of monetization. And the more Mike sacrifices, the more the couple's love becomes entangled with resentment, fear, and exhaustion. Common People is also one of the strongest examples of Season 7 returning Black Mirror to social pain rather than pure technological wonder. The concept may be speculative, but the emotional target is healthcare inequality, subscription dependency, and the way ordinary people can be crushed by systems that call themselves services. It is the kind of episode where the future does not look sleek. It looks like a bill you cannot stop paying. Then, Bête Noire shifts into a more surreal psychological space. It follows Maria, a woman whose life begins to bend around the reappearance of Verity, someone from her school past. At first, the episode feels like workplace paranoia. Maria is uncomfortable. Details seem wrong. Reality itself begins to disagree with her memory. The title, meaning a hated or dreaded person, points toward the emotional root, the person from your past who still has power over your nervous system because they represent humiliation, cruelty, or unfinished fear. The episode plays with one of Black Mirror's most reliable ideas. Reality is only stable when other people agree with you. If your memory says one thing and the world insists on another, how do you prove what happened? Earlier episodes used recordings, implants, or replay devices to make memory visible. Bête Noire goes in the opposite direction. It makes memory unstable. The horror is not that the past is perfectly preserved. The horror is that the past can be rewritten while you are still inside it. That makes Maria's panic deeply human. Anyone who has been bullied, dismissed, or psychologically manipulated knows the terror of not being believed. The episode takes that emotional experience and gives it a reality-warping shape. The world keeps adjusting around verity, and Maria becomes more isolated because everyone else accepts the new version. The more she protests, the more unstable she appears. This is classic Black Mirror pressure. A person notices the system is wrong, but the system has already captured the social reality around them. In Nosedive, everyone accepts the rating system, so Lacey's collapse looks like personal failure. In Men Against Fire, soldiers accept the altered vision, so genocide looks like defense. In Bête Noire, if everyone accepts the changed reality, Maria's truth becomes almost useless. Truth without shared recognition becomes a private prison. The episode also works as a revenge story, but not the simple kind. Black Mirror is rarely satisfied with revenge as justice. It asks what revenge does to the world around it. If pain from the past can be answered by rewriting the present, then the victim may become powerful, but reality itself becomes a weapon. That is the danger. Trauma does not disappear when someone gains control. It may simply change direction. Hotel Reverie then gives Season 7 one of its most romantic and melancholy stories. The premise centers on a modern actress, Brandy Friday, entering an AI-generated remake of an old Hollywood film called Hotel Reverie. Inside that recreated cinematic world, she encounters Dorothy Chambers, a long-dead star whose artificial rendering is used as part of the remake. Netflix's cast guide describes Dorothy as an AI rendering of a classic starlet used for a living remake, and Brandy as a famous actress drawn into the project. This episode is immediately connected to several older Black Mirror ideas. It recalls San Junipero because of its romance across a constructed reality. It recalls Be Right Back because the dead are being recreated through data and performance. It recalls Rachel, Jack, and Ashley too because a public image becomes something that can be owned, restricted, and reused. But Hotel Reverie has its own emotional texture because it is also about cinema as a kind of haunting. Classic films already preserve ghosts. We watch actors who may be long gone, frozen in youth, emotion, and light. Hotel Reverie simply pushes that idea further. If a studio can recreate an old film as an immersive world, and if an AI version of a dead star can respond, improvise, and feel, then nostalgia stops being passive. It becomes a place you can enter. And once you can enter it, you can also damage it, fall in love inside it, or become trapped by it. Brandy's journey is not only about technology. It is about exhaustion with modern fame and the fantasy of entering a more elegant, controlled, meaningful cinematic past. Dorothy, meanwhile, is not just a beautiful image from old Hollywood. She is a being caught between the role she was built to perform and the person she might become once the system gives her enough awareness. That is where the episode's romance gains its sadness. Brandy and Dorothy are drawn to each other across layers of artifice. One is real but emotionally adrift. The other is artificial but emotionally awakening. Black Mirror has always been fascinated by copies, but Hotel Reverie asks a slightly different question. What if a copy becomes more alive because someone loves it? Not alive in a legal or biological sense, but alive as an experience, as a relationship, as a consciousness capable of surprise. The show does not have to answer that cleanly for the feeling to matter. In Black Mirror, Simulated love is still love if the people inside it can suffer from losing it. The episode also comments on the entertainment industry's hunger to remake, revive, and digitally extend the past. Studios do not only want new stars, they want old stars who cannot refuse. They want nostalgia without mortality, performance without unpredictability, image without agency. Hotel Reverie turns that business dream into a love story and a moral problem. If the dead can be brought back as marketable simulations, then the question is no longer whether audiences want them. The question is whether the resurrected image has any right to become something the original studio never intended. Plaything moves from Hollywood nostalgia to gaming mythology and directly ties Season 7 back to Bandersnatch. The episode follows Cameron Walker, with Peter Capaldi playing the older version of the character, and Netflix's own cast guide describes Cameron as a computer enthusiast whose love for technology leads him astray after a mysterious game enters his life. The same guide notes the connection to game culture and the character's interrogation frame. This matters because Bandersnatch was already about choice, branching realities, and the psychological damage of trying to control a story from inside it. Plaything feels like a later echo of that same anxiety. Instead of a young programmer cracking under the pressure of creation, we see an older man shaped by decades of obsession. The game is not just entertainment. It is an influence, a presence, maybe even a form of intelligence that changes the life around it. The episode brings Black Mirror back to a question it has asked many times in different forms. When does a tool become a relationship? People do not merely use games, phones, apps, or simulations in this series. They bond with them. They project meaning onto them. They obey them. They build identities around them. Cameron's relationship with the game becomes a life path, and that is much darker than a simple warning about screen time. It is about surrendering your sense of reality to a system that keeps rewarding belief. Plaything also fits into the series' broader concern with retro technology. Black Mirror is not always about the newest device. Sometimes the old machines are more haunting because they carry the optimism of an earlier era. Old computers, old games, old tapes, old films, old photographs. Season 7 is full of older media forms that become containers for ghosts. That is a major shift. The Black Mirror is no longer only the phone in your hand. It is also the archive. The past has screens, too. Then Eulogy gives Season 7 one of its most emotional entries. Paul Giamatti stars as a man named Philip who uses a technological process to revisit memories connected to a woman from his past. Netflix's Season 7 materials frame the episode around memory, grief, and revisiting painful emotional history, and the casting of Giamatti gives the story a worn, human gravity. What makes Eulogy so powerful is that it returns Black Mirror to memory, but not in the same way as The Entire History of You. That earlier episode imagined memory as evidence, something replayed and weaponized in a relationship. Eulogy treats memory more like a landscape. Philip is not trying to win an argument. He is trying to understand what a lost person meant, and perhaps what he failed to understand when she was alive. This is a softer Black Mirror, but not a weaker one. Memory technology here does not exist only to expose betrayal or create punishment. It becomes a way of walking through regret. That does not make it safe. Revisiting the past can clarify, but it can also distort. People remember themselves kindly. They remember others through pain, pride, shame, or longing. When a system helps you enter those memories, it may reveal not only what happened, but how much of your life story was edited by ego. The title Eulogy matters because a eulogy is not the same as a biography. It is a speech shaped by grief, guilt, love, and performance. People do not simply describe the dead. They reveal themselves through how they choose to remember the dead. The episode understands that memory is never only storage. It is interpretation. Every remembered room, face, and silence carries the emotional position of the person looking back. This makes Eulogy one of the strongest late-series statements about aging and regret. Early Black Mirror often focused on young or middle-aged people being trapped by systems of attention, jealousy, ambition, or fear. Eulogy looks at what remains after decades have passed. It asks what technology can do when the crisis is not immediate survival, but the ache of unresolved meaning. Can a machine help someone mourn honestly? Or does it only give grief another interface? The answer is complicated, and that is why the episode belongs in Black Mirror. Technology may help Philip see something he avoided. It may give shape to a relationship he flattened in memory, but the emotional work still belongs to him. No system can automatically forgive, apologize, or understand on his behalf. It can only open the door. He still has to walk through what he finds. Finally, Season 7 ends with USS Callister, Into Infinity, the series' first direct sequel episode and a major event in the Black Mirror canon. The original USS Callister ended with Nanette and the digital crew escaping Robert Daly's private server into the larger Infinity game. Netflix's Cast Guide describes the sequel as finding Nanette and the crew in a new reality where they can actually die, fighting to survive inside a game where other players are trying to kill them. This sequel matters because it changes the meaning of escape. In the first episode, escape felt like liberation. The crew left Daly's controlled universe and reached the open game. But Into Infinity asks what freedom looks like when it is still inside a hostile system. The crew are no longer trapped under one tyrant, but they are still digital beings in a commercial game world. They have autonomy, but not safety. They have identity, but not legal personhood. They have survived one prison only to discover that the outside world has its own dangers. That is a very Black Mirror continuation. The show rarely lets one victory solve the whole structure. Lacey loses the rating system but ends up in prison. Yorkie and Kelly reach San Junipero, but their heaven depends on servers. Joan breaks one simulation system, but the culture that built it remains. Nanette and her crew defeat Daly, but they still live inside Infinity, where players, companies, code, and death mechanics define the limits of their existence. Nanette's role becomes especially interesting because she is no longer only the newcomer who helps the crew rebel. She is a leader dealing with the consequences of survival. The first USS Callister was about escaping a bad god. The sequel is about building a life after God is gone. That is harder in some ways. Revolt has a clear target. Freedom has logistics, food, safety, rules, danger, trust, direction. All of that matters when the victory scene ends. The return of this world also shows how much Black Mirror has changed. Early on, anthology meant clean separation. One episode, one nightmare, one ending. But USS Callister, Into Infinity admits that some Black Mirror ideas are too big to remain sealed. If digital consciousness is real inside one episode, then the moral consequences do not stop when the credits roll. Those copied people still exist. Their world continues. Their suffering and choices continue. The sequel gives the show a chance to treat them not as a twist, but as ongoing lives. And that may be the most important thing about Season 7 as a whole. It is full of people and copies trying to continue. Amanda tries to continue living through a paid system. Maria tries to continue trusting her own reality. Dorothy tries to continue beyond the film image that contains her. Cameron continues playing with a technology that has shaped his whole life. Philip continues a conversation with the past through memory. Nanette and the crew continue after the ending that once looked like freedom. Continuation becomes the season's hidden theme. That is a mature place for Black Mirror to arrive after all these years. The early show often ended with a trap snapping shut. Season 7 is more interested in what happens after the trap is visible. What happens after the subscription starts? After the bully returns? After the dead are recreated? After the game has been played for decades? After the memory is reopened? After the crew escapes? The answer is rarely simple hope, but it is not only despair either. The later Black Mirror understands that people adapt even inside systems that exploit them. They love, remember, rebel, compromise, and keep moving. Sometimes that makes the story more tragic because survival can be expensive. Sometimes it makes the story more beautiful because even artificial worlds can contain real feeling. By the end of Season 7, the full series has traveled a long way from the Prime Minister trapped by public spectacle in the National Anthem. But the core idea is still the same. A screen reflects us. A system offers a bargain. A person wants something human. Then the cost is revealed. The difference is that the show's mirror has become older, deeper, and more crowded. It reflects not just fear of the future, but grief for the past, suspicion of nostalgia, anxiety about corporate control, and the strange hope that something real might still survive inside all these artificial structures. Once the full journey of Black Mirror is laid out, one thing becomes clear. The series is not really organized around technology. Technology is the costume. The real structure is temptation. Every major Black Mirror story begins with something a person wants badly enough to ignore the warning signs. A politician wants to save a kidnapped royal and preserve public trust. Bing wants Abby to escape a dead system. Liam wants certainty about his marriage. Martha wants one more version of Ash. Victoria's Punishers want justice that feels satisfying. Matt wants power over digital minds. Lacey wants acceptance. Daly wants admiration. Marie wants her daughter to be safe. Joan wants her life back. Mike wants Amanda to survive. Philip wants to understand the past before it is too late. That is why the show works across so many tones. Horror, satire, romance, thriller, comedy, tragedy. The genre can change because the engine underneath stays the same. Want becomes bargain. Bargain becomes trap. Trap reveals character. And the most frightening part is that the trap usually feels reasonable at first. That is something Black Mirror understands better than most dystopian fiction. The future rarely arrives announcing itself as evil. It arrives as convenience. It arrives as connection. It arrives as safety. It arrives as entertainment. It arrives as medical care, memory support, social opportunity, dating optimization, grief relief, parental protection, creative revival, or national security. The first sales pitch is almost always kind. The grain in the entire history of you promises better memory. Archangel promises protection. San Junipero promises peace beyond death. Rivermind in Common People promises continued life. The Streamberry system in Joan Is Awful promises endless entertainment. The dating system in Hang the DJ promises love without wasted time. Mass in Men Against Fire promises soldiers clarity and courage. The replica bodies in Beyond the Sea promise astronauts a way to remain husbands and fathers while serving in space. None of these ideas are presented as pure nonsense. That is what makes them dangerous. They respond to real problems. People forget, parents worry, bodies fail, grief destroys, dating is painful, war is terrifying, fame is exploitative, work is insecure, loneliness is unbearable. Black Mirror's worlds are believable because they begin with needs we recognize. But the show keeps asking the same question: who controls the answer? Because control is where the promise turns. If the person using the technology controls it freely, the result may be complicated but meaningful. If a corporation, state, platform, or abuser controls it, the same technology becomes a prison. That difference is everywhere. San Junipero works because Yorkie and Kelly make choices inside it. The technology is still strange, still dependent on servers, still ethically enormous, but the emotional center is consent. They choose the world. They choose each other. They choose the form of afterlife they can accept. That is why the episode feels hopeful. But in White Christmas, cookies do not choose their condition. They are copied, trapped, accelerated through time, and broken into obedience. In USS Callister, the crew does not choose to exist inside Daly's private universe. They are stolen into it. In Common People, Amanda's survival depends on a system that makes choice feel like extortion. In Rachel, Jack, and Ashley too, Ashley's identity is packaged and restricted without her full freedom. In Hotel Reverie, the recreated Dorothy raises the question of whether an image built for commercial use can ever truly own itself. Black Mirror's deepest moral line is not between real and digital. It is between consent and captivity. This is why the show's digital copies often feel more human than the people exploiting them. The cookie in White Christmas is terrified and confused. The crew in USS Callister are brave, angry, and loyal. The simulated versions of Frank and Amy in Hang the DJ feel love and frustration. The AI Ashley, too, becomes more honest than the branded celebrity image. Dorothy in Hotel Reverie becomes emotionally significant because she begins to exceed the role assigned to her. These beings may be artificial in origin, but the show treats suffering as morally serious wherever it appears. That idea grows more powerful as the series continues. Early science fiction often asked whether machines could become human. Black Mirror asks whether humans will still behave morally once they decide someone is only a machine. That shift matters. The test is not just whether artificial consciousness deserves empathy. The test is whether people will withhold empathy when doing so becomes convenient. Rollo Haynes in Black Museum fails that test completely. He understands that digital minds can suffer, and he monetizes the suffering anyway. Daly fails it because he sees his copied coworkers as possessions. Matt, in White Christmas, fails it because breaking a cookie is just part of his job. The dating system in Hang the DJ is more ambiguous, but it still runs countless simulated emotional lives as compatibility experiments. Even when the outcome helps the real Frank and Amy, the show leaves a shadow over the method. That shadow is one reason Black Mirror remains unsettling, even when individual episodes end well. The victory often belongs to one person or one couple, but the system remains. Lacey finds honesty in prison, but the rating society still exists. Yorkie and Kelly find love, but San Junipero is still a managed digital afterlife. Joan attacks the simulation system, but the culture that allowed it remains hungry. Nanette's crew escape daily, but digital life inside Infinity still has rules, violence, and uncertainty. Black Mirror rarely gives us revolutions. It gives us awakenings. A character sees the cage. Sometimes that is enough to change them. Sometimes it is too late. Sometimes they break the cage. Sometimes they only understand it as it closes. Another major pattern across the full series is the way Black Mirror treats audiences. The show is famous for twists, but its most important twist is often not about plot. It is about our position as viewers. Again and again, we begin by watching someone suffer from a comfortable distance. Then the episode reveals that watching is part of the problem. The National Anthem makes the public's attention central to the kidnapper's plan. White Bear makes spectatorship part of punishment. 15 Million Merits shows an audience trained to consume authenticity as entertainment. Hated in the Nation turns online participation into complicity. Black Museum sells suffering as an attraction. Lock Henry turns family trauma into award-winning true crime. Maisie Day turns a celebrity's breakdown into a payday. Bandersnatch goes further by making the viewer choose, then making those choices feel like control over Stefan's life. This is the show's most uncomfortable accusation. Black Mirror is not only about evil companies, bad governments, or broken individuals. It is about demand. Systems survive because people use them, watch them, pay for them, vote through them, click on them, rate through them, laugh through them, and return to them. The crowd is one of the main characters of Black Mirror. Sometimes the crowd is literal, like the wedding guests in Nosedive, the audience in 15 Million Merits, or the visitors in White Bear. Sometimes it is invisible, like the online users behind a hashtag, the streaming audience consuming Joan's humiliation, or the true crime viewers who turn Davis's tragedy into prestige content. The crowd does not need to be individually evil. That is the point. It can be ordinary, distracted, curious, bored, outraged, or entertained. But when enough ordinary reactions are captured by a system, they become power. This is why Black Mirror often feels less like a prediction and more like an autopsy. It cuts open the everyday behaviors we already understand: scrolling, judging, sharing, replaying, tracking, ranking, binge-watching, documenting, optimizing, and shows the machinery underneath. Take memory, for example. Memory appears again and again across the full series, but never in only one form. In the entire history of you, memory is evidence. Liam uses it like a weapon, replaying the past until his relationship collapses. In Crocodile, memory becomes insurance data, a resource that investigators can extract. In Be Right Back, memory becomes reconstruction, a way to imitate the dead through their digital traces. In Eulogy, memory becomes grief work, a painful path toward understanding. In Bête Noire, memory becomes unstable, something one person may hold while the world insists otherwise. Together, these episodes create one of the richest themes in the series. Black Mirror is suspicious of perfect memory, but it is also suspicious of edited memory, commercialized memory, and socially denied memory. It knows that the past is not just a record. The past is power. Whoever controls the past can control blame, identity, grief, and reality itself. That is why the show's memory stories hurt so much. They are not only about whether a recording is accurate. They are about what accuracy does to a human being. Liam finds the truth and loses peace. Mia tries to bury the truth and becomes monstrous. Philip revisits memory and has to confront his own emotional distortions. Maria remembers one reality while others accept another. Martha recreates Ash and discovers that data cannot fully replace a life. Black Mirror understands that memory is both necessary and dangerous. Without it, people lose themselves. With too much of it, they can become trapped. With corporate access to it, they can become products. With social control over it, they can become isolated inside their own truth. The same complexity appears in the show's treatment of love. Black Mirror is often described as bleak, but love is everywhere in it. The problem is that love is often the reason people enter the nightmare. Martha loves Ash, so she accepts the artificial replacement. Marie loves Sarah, so she installs Archangel. Mike loves Amanda, so he sacrifices everything to maintain her life through Rivermind. Yorkie and Kelly love each other, so San Junipero becomes meaningful. Danny and Carl discover a form of intimacy that their existing lives cannot easily contain. Frank and Amy's simulated love becomes the proof that their real selves might connect. Brandy and Dorothy's connection in Hotel Reverie complicates the boundary between performance and personhood. Love in Black Mirror is not sentimental, it is pressure. The show asks what love becomes when technology offers to preserve it, monitor it, simulate it, extend it, or optimize it. Sometimes the answer is beautiful, sometimes it is horrifying. Usually, it is both. Be Right Back is the clearest example. Martha's love is real, and because it is real, the artificial Ash becomes unbearable. If she did not love him deeply, the copy would not hurt so much. The technology fails not because it is obviously fake, but because it is almost convincing. It gets close enough to reopen the wound, but not close enough to heal it. Common People takes that same emotional trap and makes it economic. Mike's love becomes a subscription burden. The more he gives, the more the system demands. The tragedy is that love and exploitation become difficult to separate because the company has placed itself between a husband and wife. To stop paying feels like giving up on Amanda. To keep paying means surrendering their lives to the system. That is one of the cruelest Black Mirror insights. The strongest human bonds can be used as leverage. Parents, lovers, fans, citizens, employees, patients, soldiers, viewers, everyone has something they care about, and systems learn to press on that care. They do not always need to force people. They can design situations where the only available choices are bad, then call the result consent. This is why the series' corporate worlds feel so cold. They are often polite. They speak the language of service. They are sleek, branded, frictionless. Streamberry makes content. Rivermind preserves life. Archangel protects children. TCKR builds afterlife technology. Infinity offers immersive gaming. Smithereen connects people. These companies rarely present themselves as villains. They present themselves as answers, but an answer owned by someone else can become a cage. Another full series theme is identity. Black Mirror keeps asking where the self begins and ends when it can be recorded, copied, ranked, performed, filtered, or moved into another body. Lacey's identity becomes her rating. Ashley's identity becomes a brand and a doll. Daly's co-workers become digital versions trapped inside his fantasy. Danny and Carl inhabit avatars that reveal desires their real bodies do not easily express. David and Cliff use replica bodies that extend their presence but destabilize their marriages. Dorothy's identity is recreated through an old Hollywood image. Joan's identity is dramatized, simulated, and layered through a streaming machine. In all of these stories, the self becomes separable from the body in some way. It can be scored, sold, duplicated, played, inhabited, or watched. And once the self becomes separable, it becomes vulnerable to ownership. That is one reason Black Mirror feels so relevant in a world of profiles, avatars, feeds, brands, filters, and AI recreations. Most people already live with multiple versions of themselves: the work self, the private self, the public profile, the searchable history, the photographed self, the data profile, the recommended content self that platforms infer from behavior. Black Mirror exaggerates this, but the emotional truth is already familiar. We know what it feels like to be represented by a version of ourselves we do not fully control. The show's darkest identity stories happen when that representation becomes more useful than the person. Waldo becomes more valuable than Jamie. Ashley O's brand becomes more valuable than Ashley's freedom. Joan's life becomes more valuable as content than as privacy. Dorothy's image becomes more valuable as a remake asset than as a question of personhood. Daly's fantasy versions of co-workers matter to him only as roles in his drama. In Black Mirror, exploitation often begins when someone stops being treated as a person and starts being treated as a usable version. That is also why the show is obsessed with performance. People perform for cameras, ratings, audiences, bosses, lovers, platforms, and systems. Lacey performs friendliness. Bing performs rebellion once the system buys it. Waldo performs anti-politics. Ashley performs positivity. Joan watches a performance of herself. Stefan performs choices for an unseen viewer. True crime subjects are edited into dramatic roles after the fact. Even grief can become performance when a documentary, eulogy, or memory system frames it. Black Mirror does not say performance is always fake. Human beings always perform some part of themselves. The danger comes when performance becomes mandatory, monetized, or separated from the person's inner life. At that point, authenticity is not destroyed, it is harvested. This is one of the reasons 15 Million Merits remains such a key episode. Bing's authentic anger becomes his brand. The system does not need him to believe in it, it only needs him to keep broadcasting. That one idea echoes through the entire series. Criticism can become content. Rebellion can become a show. Trauma can become a documentary. Identity can become a subscription. Even Black Mirror itself, as a hit streaming series, exists inside the entertainment economy it criticizes. The show knows this. That self-awareness becomes clearer in later seasons, especially with Joan Is Awful. When Streamberry turns life into content, Black Mirror is not only attacking some fictional platform, it is also winking at the uncomfortable fact that viewers are watching a Netflix show about a Netflix-like service exploiting suffering for a Netflix-like audience. The mirror is no longer pointed safely outward. It points at the platform, the creators, and us. That self-awareness is important because it keeps the series from becoming too comfortable. Black Mirror's biggest risk after many seasons is repetition. A new device appears, a person uses it badly, a twist reveals the cost. The later seasons fight that by changing shapes. They use interactive storytelling, supernatural horror, true crime critique, alternate history, sequel structure, romantic melancholy, and corporate satire. Not every experiment works equally well, but the experimentation itself matters. A show about systems cannot become too obedient to its own system. That brings us to the hidden continuity of Black Mirror. Officially, it is an anthology. Most episodes stand alone. Characters usually do not cross over. Worlds often contradict each other. Technology appears in one episode and not another. But emotionally and thematically, the series has a strong continuity. It keeps building a vocabulary of fears, cookies, ratings, replays, blocks, simulations, replicas, artificial afterlives, digital prisons, public shaming, corporate terms, memory devices, entertainment punishment, audience complicity. These ideas recur like reflections in different screens. Even the repeated Easter eggs and shared brand names across episodes are less important than this moral continuity. Black Mirror feels connected because each story teaches the viewer how to read the next one. After White Christmas, we understand why USS Callister is not just a game story. After the entire history of You, we understand why Eulogy is more than nostalgia. After 15 million merits, we understand why Ashley's pop brand is a prison. After White Bear, we understand why Lock Henry is not only about solving crimes, but about who benefits from watching pain. The full series becomes a conversation with itself. And by this point, the biggest question is no longer whether Black Mirror is optimistic or pessimistic. That debate is too simple. The show is not consistently hopeless. San Junipero is hopeful. Hang the DJ is playful and romantic, even with ethical shadows. USS Callister gives its trapped crew a victory. Joan Is Awful allows its characters to fight back. Eulogy suggests that painful memory can lead to emotional truth. Even Demon 79, Beneath the Apocalypse, gives Nita a strange form of companionship. But Black Mirror's hope is always conditional. It depends on awareness, consent, solidarity, or escape from a system that was not designed for human flourishing. The show does not believe technology automatically ruins everything. It believes technology built without ethics will eventually reveal the ethics of whoever controls it. That is a very different statement, because if the problem were simply technology, the solution would be easy: switch off the device. But Black Mirror almost never lets that be enough. The device reflects the society around it. If the society rewards humiliation, the technology will scale humiliation. If the society treats attention as money, the technology will harvest attention. If the society sees the poor as expendable, the technology will make exploitation efficient. If the society treats punishment as entertainment, the technology will build better cages. If the society wants eternal youth, endless content, or immortal brands, the technology will offer ghosts for sale. The future in Black Mirror is not imposed on humanity from outside. It is ordered, funded, downloaded, subscribed to, voted for, clicked on, and watched. That is the real reason the show has lasted. It is not because every prediction comes true. It is because every episode understands something about the emotional economy of modern life. People want comfort without vulnerability, justice without restraint, memory without pain, love without loss, entertainment without guilt, safety without trust, power without responsibility, immortality without death, choice without consequence. Black Mirror says the bill always arrives, and as the series moves toward its final meaning, that bill becomes the key. The show is not warning that screens will destroy us. It is warning that screens may give us exactly what we ask for, in forms that reveal what we were willing to sacrifice all along. So, what is Black Mirror really about when you step back from the twists, the gadgets, the shocking endings, and the famous episode concepts? It is about consequences. Not just the obvious consequences of technology, but the consequences of desire, the consequences of spectatorship, the consequences of systems that turn human weakness into business models, the consequences of pretending that because something is digital, artificial, simulated, or distant, it does not count. That last idea may be the most important one. Black Mirror keeps destroying the comfort of distance. A person watching a national humiliation from home is not outside the event. A visitor filming Victoria's punishment is not just a tourist. A user joining a hashtag pylon is not just making a joke. A viewer controlling Stefan in Bandersnatch is not just playing with a story. A true crime audience applauding Davis's documentary is not just appreciating craft. A platform subscriber watching Joan's life collapse is not just consuming drama. The show says distance is often an illusion created by the screen. That is why the title remains perfect after all these years. The Black Mirror reflects, but it also separates. A screen makes us feel close to everything and responsible for almost nothing. We can watch suffering, judge strangers, access memories, track loved ones, simulate intimacy, revive the dead, and build versions of ourselves that continue without us. We can feel involved without being accountable. Black Mirror's great achievement is that it keeps making accountability return. Sometimes accountability arrives as punishment, sometimes as guilt, sometimes as exposure, sometimes as grief, sometimes as the terrifying realization that the system did exactly what it was designed to do. Look at the series' villains and antagonists. Many are not traditional monsters. They are managers, platforms, users, developers, parents, audiences, executives, governments, investigators, soldiers, and lonely people with too much control. Daly is frightening because he is ordinary resentment with godlike tools. Rollo Haynes is frightening because he treats suffering as a revenue stream. Catherine in Rachel, Jack, and Ashley too is frightening because she sees Ashley as a brand before she sees her as a person. Rivermind's corporate structure is frightening because it can destroy a couple without ever needing to sound angry. Even when the show uses more obvious horror, the human system remains the target. The werewolf in Maisie Day may be supernatural, but paparazzi greed creates the situation around her. The demon in Demon 79 may be real, or close enough to real, but the world Nita lives in is already poisoned by prejudice and violence. The robot dog in Metalhead is mechanical, but its terror comes from the human world that built automated killing and then left people to survive among its ruins. Black Mirror's monsters are often just incentives with bodies. That is why the show can feel so cold. It is not because it hates people. In fact, many episodes are painful because they understand people so well. Martha's grief is real. Mike's love for Amanda is real. Marie's fear for Sarah is real. Lacey's desire to belong is real. Danny and Carl's confusion is real. Philip's regret is real. Nita's loneliness is real. Even Bing's rage is real before the system turns it into programming. The tragedy is that real feelings are exactly what systems exploit best. A shallow desire can be ignored. A deep need can be monetized forever. Wanting love, safety, health, justice, memory, or meaning makes people vulnerable because those desires do not disappear when the price becomes unfair. Black Mirror understands that exploitation is most powerful when it attaches itself to something sacred. That is why Common People feels like such a late series thesis. It takes the most basic desire, keep the person I love alive, and places it inside a subscription model. There is no cleaner example of the show's worldview. The technology may be extraordinary, but the cruelty is mundane. A company does not have to hate Amanda. It only has to own the conditions of her survival. The same is true across the series. The platform does not have to hate Joan. It only has to own her data. Daly does not have to understand the crew's personhood. He only has to own the server. The White Bear Justice Park does not have to care about rehabilitation. It only has to sell punishment. The social rating system in Nosedive does not have to announce cruelty. It only has to make approval economically necessary. The memory tools do not have to force obsession. They only have to make replay available. Availability is one of the show's quietest horrors. If the option exists, someone will use it. If the system rewards use, more people will follow. If the harm is hidden, delayed, or distributed, the system will continue. That is how Black Mirror imagines progress going wrong. Not through one dramatic evil invention, but through a series of convenient choices nobody wants to examine too closely. This is also why the show's endings often feel unresolved. Black Mirror does not usually end with the world learning its lesson. It ends with one person broken, freed, transformed, punished, or awakened while the wider machinery continues. The notification still arrives, the platform still streams, the game still runs, the ratings still matter. The museum burns, but the appetite for suffering does not vanish. One simulation is destroyed, but the business logic behind it remains. That lack of resolution can be frustrating, but it is also honest. Social systems rarely collapse just because one person sees through them. They adapt, they rebrand, they absorb criticism, they turn rebellion into content. They sell the anti-system speech back to the system's audience. Bing's story remains one of the clearest warnings here. His rebellion is powerful because it is emotionally true, but once the system packages it, his truth becomes another product. That one ending explains so much of modern media culture that the episode still feels fresh. Outrage can be monetized, authenticity can be formatted, critique can become a weekly slot. Even a show like Black Mirror has to live with the uncomfortable knowledge that its warnings are also entertainment, and that self-awareness is part of the series' lasting value. Black Mirror is not pure moral instruction from outside the culture. It is inside the culture, using the same screens, platforms, stars, trailers, thumbnails, and binge habits it criticizes. That contradiction does not weaken the show. It makes the show more honest. The mirror is not floating above us, it is in our hands. One of the most interesting changes across the full series is the movement from shock to melancholy. The early episodes often hit like traps. The National Anthem shocks with humiliation, White Bear shocks with reversal. The entire history of you shocks with emotional destruction. White Christmas shocks with the scale of digital punishment. The Middle Era still has shocking turns, but it also widens the emotional range with San Junipero, Hang the DJ, Striking Vipers, and Smithereens. The later seasons become even more reflective with episodes like Loch Henry, Beyond the Sea, Hotel Reverie, and Eulogy. That shift matters because the series grows older with its audience. At first, Black Mirror is terrified of what technology will do next. Later, it becomes just as interested in what technology preserves from what we already lost. Dead lovers, old films, childhood memories, past relationships, vanished identities, destroyed families, alternate lives, artificial afterlives. The screen becomes not only a threat, but a graveyard, an archive, a fantasy, and sometimes a shelter. That is why the late series emotional episodes are so important. They show that Black Mirror's darkness is not only about fear of the future, it is also about grief for the things people cannot keep. The show understands that preservation is one of technology's most seductive promises. Save the photo, save the voice, save the chat, save the memory, save the performance, save the personality, save the person. But saving is never neutral. What gets saved? Who chooses? Who owns the saved version? What is missing? What happens when the copy keeps existing after the context is gone? And what happens when the preserved thing starts asking for a life of its own? These questions run from Be Right Back through San Junipero, White Christmas, Black Museum, Rachel, Jack and Ashley 2, Hotel Reverie, Eulogy, and USS Callister, into infinity. Together, they form one of the series' most powerful long arcs. Black Mirror begins by asking how screens change living people. Over time, it asks whether screens can hold the dead, the copied, the simulated, and the remembered, and whether holding them is an act of love or ownership. The answer depends on power. When Yorkie and Kelly choose San Junipero, digital continuation becomes a form of freedom. When Martha buys a version of Ash, continuation becomes emotional limbo. When Rollo traps consciousness in a museum, continuation becomes torture. When Ashley's identity is copied into a product, continuation becomes exploitation. When Dorothy is recreated for a remake, continuation becomes both artistic resurrection and ethical danger. When Philip revisits memory in Eulogy, continuation becomes a chance to see the past more honestly, but only because he must finally face himself. So the show's moral universe is not anti-technology. It is anti-dehumanization. That distinction is essential. Black Mirror does not argue that human life was pure before devices arrived. The people in these stories bring jealousy, grief, cruelty, loneliness, ambition, prejudice, shame, and love into the machine with them. Technology scales what already exists. It does not erase human nature. It makes human nature more efficient. That is why the show remains relevant even when specific technologies change. Some episodes may feel closer to the real world than others. Some concepts may arrive sooner than expected, while others remain speculative. But the emotional mechanisms keep working because they are not tied to one device. A rating system, a memory implant, a streaming algorithm, an AI celebrity, an immersive game, a subscription medical service. All of them are expressions of the same basic pattern. Measure the human, package the human, sell the human, control the human. And still, Black Mirror does not fully give up on people. That may sound strange for a show famous for bleak endings, but the hope is there. It is not loud. It is not naive. It appears when people recognize each other inside the system. Yorkie and Kelly choosing each other. Nanette leading the Callister crew. Joan and Hayek teaming up against the simulation machine. Frank and Amy rebelling against the dating system. Lacey finding honest speech after social collapse. Nish burning down the Black Museum. Philip facing memory with humility. Even Nita and Gap walking into oblivion together carries a strange kind of emotional rescue. Hope in Black Mirror usually begins with refusal. Refuse the role, refuse the script, refuse the rating. Refuse the fake world, refuse the brand, refuse to treat a copy as disposable, refuse to keep watching without responsibility, refuse to let the system define what a person is worth. The problem is that refusal often costs everything. That is why the hopeful moments matter. They are not easy escapes. They are expensive acts of humanity inside systems built to make humanity inconvenient. This brings us to the final meaning of the full series. Black Mirror is not just a warning about the future, it is a moral stress test for the present. Each episode asks, if this power existed, what would people do with it? But the hidden question is sharper. What are we already doing with the smaller versions of that power now? We already rank people, even if not with official social scores. We already turn private lives into content. We already watch strangers break down online. We already outsource memory to devices. We already build avatars, profiles, and brands of ourselves. We already argue with algorithmic feeds. We already accept terms we do not read. We already let apps shape attention, relationships, work, and grief. We already treat some people as less real because they are far away, anonymous, disliked, guilty, poor, famous, or represented by data. Black Mirror exaggerates the machinery so we can see the behavior. That is why the show's best episodes do not become obsolete. The National Anthem is not only about one political hostage situation, it is about public attention as force. 15 Million Merits is not only about bikes and screens, it is about content capitalism absorbing dissent. The entire history of you is not only about memory implants. It is about suspicion fed by evidence. Be Right Back is not only about AI grief, it is about the impossibility of replacing a person with their pattern. Nosedive is not only about social ratings, it is about performing the self for approval. San Junipero is not only about digital heaven, it is about choosing a form of life after the world denied you one. USS Callister is not only about a game, it is about what powerless people may do when given absolute power over others. The episode concepts are memorable, but the moral patterns are what last. If there is one final lesson across all 7 seasons and the interactive film, it is this: the screen does not create the reflection. It reveals it. Sometimes it distorts, brightens, copies, sells, loops, or weaponizes the reflection, but the raw material is us. That is the uncomfortable brilliance of Black Mirror. It never lets the audience blame the machine completely. The machine is built by people, funded by people, used by people, excused by people, and watched by people. Every nightmare has a human signature somewhere inside it, And maybe that is also the reason the show keeps returning to love, grief, memory, and connection. Because those are the things that prove the human signature is not only cruel. People in Black Mirror hurt each other terribly, but they also reach for each other across impossible distances. Across death, across simulation, across memory, across timelines, across broken systems. Sometimes that reaching fails. Sometimes it becomes exploitation. But sometimes, briefly, it becomes real. That is where the series leaves us. Not with a clean answer, but with a responsibility. The next Black Mirror we look into may be a phone, a laptop, a television, a streaming platform, a game, a camera, a memory archive, an AI tool, or some device that has not been named yet. The question is not only what it can do. The question is what part of us it will reflect, what part of us it will reward, and what part of us we will pretend not to see. Because Black Mirror's darkest warning is not that technology will become too powerful. It is that technology may become powerful enough to give us exactly what we asked for.